Chasing the Mind, podcast number 1. When Geeks Go Outside with Trey Reilly. Welcome to Chasing the Mind, hosted by Dr. Angela Johnson and Dr. Stephanie Schwartz, the podcast that explores the art and science of the mind. Each episode, we will feature a topic or guest who offers a unique perspective in answering the following questions. How do our thoughts influence our sense of who we are? How do we impact the world around us? And can changing our mind change everything? Today on Chasing the Mind, Dr. Angela and Dr. Stephanie will be speaking with Trey Reilly, veteran LARP.
I'm Dr. Stephanie Schwartz.
I'm Dr. Angela Johnson.
Trey Reilly found a D&D box set sitting in her mother's closet when she was 12, and it was all downhill from there. She's written, co-written, run, and staffed a number of LARPs over the years, including Svaha, which is a 3-year sci-fi LARP campaign, a series of Divus X games, Speed Dating, and Madrigal 2. Her games have been played on 5 continents, which, according to Trey, is way less impressive than it sounds. Welcome, Trey.
Thanks for having me here.
We are very excited to have you here as our first guest on Chasing the Mind.
I'm delighted to be your first guest.
So you know a lot about LARPing. We know not so much.
No,
and we're guessing that a lot of our audience will know little to nothing. So let's start off with, what is LARPing and how did you personally get introduced to it?
LARPing is live action role-playing, LARP. There's a bunch of different kinds of role-playing out there, the most famous being Dungeons and Dragons, which is a tabletop version. Live action role-playing is a slightly different hobby where you embody a character and get dressed in costumes, and if you're playing theater-style LARPing, you might run around a hotel or a house or a backyard and play, or buffer-style LARPing, where you're running around with simulated weapons and shields and things. Doing live combat activities as well as role-playing and solving problems and figuring out puzzles and figuring out codes and telling stories in a variety of ways.
How did you get into the LARPing end of it then?
I went to a convention. There are conventions all over the country that are dedicated to different kinds of gaming, board gaming, card games like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, war gaming, tabletop gaming like Dungeons and Dragons, and LARPing. And I happened to be at a gaming convention, TotalCon, here in Massachusetts, that happens every February. And I was in my 20s and looking for something new and went, what's this? Let's try it. And it was a Call of Cthulhu LARP that was being put on. And I had a fantastic time, and I've never looked back.
So tell us about the process you go through.
So first you find a game. And by finding a game, you've found something that appeals to you, that speaks to a creative spark in you. Perhaps you really, you really like post-apocalyptic zombie movies, and there's a post-apocalyptic zombie LARP near you. And so you love that genre, and that's what enticed you. Or there's a medieval fantasy game, and you've really wanted to be a really badass knight. And so this is a chance for you to fulfill yourself creatively, to try something that maybe is a little bit outside your wheelhouse. So once you found your game's going to have a bunch of documents that detail the world on their website. It also details various societies within the world, different races, different cultures, and you just see what kind of speaks to you. There aren't really a lot of rules when it comes to character creation, especially when you're building your own background and writing your own thing. Write something that fits that world.
So that we understand you and what you've done, what are some of the stories that have particularly appealed to you?
Every writer has their tropes.
True.
And I write stories to help my players feel triumphant.
Okay.
To have them succeed in interesting and creative ways that they might not have considered when they joined the game. to have emotional moments that they might not have in their daily lives. Whether that's bringing them to a moment of grief, scaring the pants off of them, bringing them to a moment of righteous rage as they're fighting evil. For me, it's all about giving them moments of emotion, because when I play, it's the moments of emotion that I will remember after the game is over.
I mean, this really sounds cathartic.
It's extremely cathartic. It's, our players come from every walk of life. We've got doctors and neurosurgeons and college kids and gas station attendants and you name it. Everything from 16-year-olds to 70-year-olds. And sometimes it's just nice to get out of your own head. And to be the person that, if only you were living in 14th century France, you could have done X, Y, and Z. Oh, if only you were living at the time of this war, what great things could you have accomplished? But instead, you're an accountant. And you sit in an office all day. And while there's nothing wrong with being an accountant, sometimes the mind wants moments of valor that are not necessarily easy to find in daily life.
Do you find, though, that people sometimes come to the game with more of a darker interest, though, sort of wanting to play maybe not so triumphant and heroic a role? I'm thinking of Westworld. It's coming to mind.
People certainly go through their anti-hero sketchy loner stages, yes. Huh. But
so is LARPing like a progression developmentally as well?
It can be. It can be. Especially a lot of the teenage boys who come to LARPing come as black trench coat wearing loners with single swords. And sometimes they realize that eventually that trope is not for them or isn't going to get them to their goals in the game. LARPing is an essentially social hobby. There's only so much you can really accomplish by yourself. Many games are large, 40, 60, 80 people.
Wow.
And there's a lot of different stories going on. And so you can't defeat the enemy by yourself. You have to bring other people with you. You can't gather all the information in the game by yourself. You're going to need to trade favors with other people. I'll help you on the story that you're working on if you help me on this story that I'm working on. Even just finding out when things are happening, you're going to need to talk to other people. You're going to need to talk to the non-player characters or NPCs that staff has put into the world to represent all of the rest of the world that is not populated by the heroes who are playing the game. You have to talk to people. You have to interact. You have to be social.
That's so interesting because it kind of goes against, I think, the stereotype of some of these activities. It's for people who don't have these skills, who can't really negotiate or navigate these kind of interactions. And what you're saying is just the opposite, that this is for people who really have very sophisticated interpersonal skills and can do it in a very creative way.
And in a very safe way, which I think is really important. Because if somebody has social anxiety or is afraid of speaking in public, because you're the bearer of the gem of whatever, and now you have to be the one to face down the demon king on the field, that's very empowering to somebody who's kind of shy. That's very empowering to somebody who doesn't necessarily speak up for themselves in daily life. There's a running joke in LARPing that when we go to the business world or when we go to interviews, we are LARPing as the perfect employee.
Oh, that's funny.
Interesting. That's fascinating.
You put on your costume, and in this case, my costume is my business suit, and my heels and my lipstick. And I walk into the interview, and I have the character in front of me, which is embodied by my resume and my manners, and I am the person that you want to hire. And being able to play that character, it helps. It's a silly trick, but it helps.
That's interesting because when you did the introduction, there was something about speed dating. What was that about?
Speed dating was a game it was literally fictional dating.
Wow, that actually sounds like living hell.
It was actually super fun because instead of... Have you ever done speed dating, Stephanie?
I believe once. I've blocked so much dating out of my life. Like,
it can be really stressful because you're meeting everybody for a minute at a time, at 2 minutes at a time. Each time you're worrying if they're going to reject you and if you're going to like them and how to put your best foot forward. A lot of the pressure in that is taken off when you know that person is playing a character and you're playing a character yourself. And so speed dating the LARP was the characters trying to date each other, not the people trying to date each other. And the way I wrote the game, everybody had at least one sensible match in the room. And there was subplots built in the game and a bunch of other things. But it was a light, funny... one of the characters was a robot who had attachments. One of the characters was an FBI agent who was there it was the only way that he could figure out to actually get a conversation with the scientist that he was trying to recruit into the FBI. So he showed up at speed dating. And so there were undercurrents that were built into the game. So it wasn't just, hey, we're going to make small talk for 2 minutes and then go on to the next person. But all of the pressure of facing somebody and making all of those first impressions is gone.
So do you find then these roles that you play, these ways in which you maybe take on characteristics that are difficult for you in your real life, so does that carry over for you?
Absolutely.
Do you think that's true for other people?
Some of my friends, some of my best friends in LARPing are people that I have gone through extremely stressful in-game situations with. And just because it's pretend doesn't mean that you don't get the same physical reactions. Your heart starts pumping. All of the reactions of stress are still there. You breathe hard. Your mind starts going at a different rate. After a while, you don't remember. You're not actively thinking about the fact that this is pretend. Mm-hmm. You're just in that moment, which is one of the reasons we do this, to get to the point where you're embodying that character and you're in the moment and you're having a great time, or you're scared out of your mind. When you bond with people that way, it's a completely different bond than, like, hey, we go out to the movies every Friday night.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we have bonded together through stress. We have solved a problem together.
You've been to war with some of these people.
We have literally gone through many, many battles together and watched each other's flanks and rescued someone when they're down and dragged them out of bad situations. And even though it's pretend, all of the usual social effects of being in situations with people still apply. And when you have been in situations like that, it absolutely gives you confidence in the rest of your life. It absolutely helps you to face down other situations. When you face down, the demon lord of whatever with his, huge costume and his glowing eyes, asking for your a raise from your boss is a little less scary.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
When you achieve other things, even in a fictional setting, and you still achieved it, even though it was the character, you did the thing. You took the action, you set the words, you swung the blow. Achievement is still achievement, and there's still a psychological payoff from that. And that still helps you to be more secure in your character. That still helps you to be more confident in the rest of your life.
That's so interesting.
It does.
Makes me want to go LARP.
It actually does. Well, we hope our listeners will want to also. But
I've done my job.
Some of the things we've seen you post on social media are some of the things that you do to get into character. So costuming, things like that. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of creating characters, both psychologically and physically?
Sure.
And how that gets you sort of into it.
For me, that process is very similar to an actor's process.
Okay.
I have a theater background. My degree is in theatrical lighting design. And actors build their characters through, or at least some actors do, at least I do, through asking questions. What would a typical day in this person's life be like? Where do they live? Who do they associate with? Why are they on the path that they're on? What is their family like and how has that affected them? What are their formative experiences? What are their goals, their ideals, their dreams? And so when I'm building what that character looks like in my head, I'm building things that are reflective of who they are as a person, in the same way that a costumer would build the costume of a character in a play. And so, maybe they wear a certain kind of hat because it's a certain time period, or maybe they wear pants instead of skirts because that's part of how they see the world and want the world to see them, or they're making a radical feminist statement, or for the same reasons that each person has their personal style. My characters each have a personal style.
And are you doing this kind of independent of, you said there's a lot of material that may be written by someone, but on your own, you still have this sort of autonomy within that world to create this persona.
LARPing is a shared storytelling medium. The people who are writing the world write the world. The people who are creating their characters, or even just embodying their characters, because there's certainly games that pre-write and pre-cast the characters for you almost as if it was a play. But every actor brings their own spirit to that role. You can see Cyrano de Bergerac in 15 different theaters, and whoever's playing Cyrano is going to bring something different to that role in each time. In LARPing, it's the same way. Even if you cast the role, 3 different people are going to play the same part in completely different ways that you may not have envisioned when you wrote the character. And so the player tells us something about their character, and we tell them how the world responds. And so we tell stories to each other, and everything changes as we all act together. And it's constantly surprising.
Have you ever done a LARP from a different perspective, or done the same sort of storyline but played a different role in that storyline, or come at it from a different angle?
I'm going to answer that in a slightly different way. Campaign games don't tend to play again. There are no second chances in a play game. There's no do-overs. There's no, we're going to try it again next week and see if we can get a better result. Short form games, on the other hand, can be a lot more like, remember those how to solve a murder mystery games?
Yes.
Absolutely. I have one at home. I'm ready to run.
Those are an early form of LARPs. Because you got your characters, and you had kind of a plot line, and people had different motivations, and it's a very basic LARP, but it's a LARP. What LARPers do is much more complicated than that, and the storylines tend to be more complex. The backgrounds, the motivations, the characters tend to be more complex, but has a lot in common. They are essentially, at the end of the day, the same kind of thing. And so short form games, especially ones that we have in the game bank, that anybody can download, anybody can run, a lot of them will run 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And for me, one of the joys is running a game more than once and having completely different players inhabit those roles, and seeing how the plot line changes and seeing what different people bring to those characters. Because it's the same character.
Right.
It's the same write-up. It's the same background. I haven't changed anything, but just 2 different actor interpretation of those roles. I find it to be a fascinating experience as you see the exact same story play out in completely different ways.
I know that you have a lot of interest in bringing an increasing amount of diversity to LARP, in terms of gender and all kinds of race and all kinds of other variables. So can you talk a little bit about that and how much diversity there already is?
Sure.
And I know you have some great ideas for increasing it.
Part of it's very selfish. When I started LARPing, there weren't a lot of women. Because I've been doing this a very long time, and when it started, D&D was a very male-oriented hobby. LARPing, in fact, brought tons of women into that particular type of gaming because you got to dress up. You got to inhabit character. You got to play in a completely different way that wasn't just about battle and combat and math. And so it appealed to women in a very different way than wargaming did. And it brought a lot of women into the hobby, which was a wonderful thing, I think, for everybody. But the numbers have continued to grow. Now we have games that the staff is 50% women, wow, which means the storytelling changes.
In what ways?
Sometimes women want to tell stories about different things than guys do, or that guys think of, or women have a different way of looking at certain tropes. Usually less sexist ones, to start with the easy one. But it also changes things in really interesting ways when you've got a ruling queen of a kingdom. or when you've got a ruling queen of a kingdom who's a lesbian. And now you've got an entire, instead of having a ball to determine who's going to marry the queen from the available princes, you've got a bisexual queen and her suitors of all genders, and how that changes the story. How does that change the line of succession? How do, if you've got a regular English style, the son of the queen or the daughter of the queen is the one who rules next. How does a wider spectrum of sexuality change those stories? How does having women in power in very different ways change stories that we grew up with? If Maid Marian can rescue herself, how does that change the story of Robin Hood?
Right.
If the Sheriff of Nottingham is female, how does that change the rest of that story? One of the things that really impresses me when it comes to diversity in LARPing, and is so important when it comes to diversity in LARPing, is that everyone needs a place to be a hero.
Absolutely.
And changing narratives for people of color who may or may not get to see themselves as a king. There's a reason why the upcoming Black Panther movie is so important. There's a reason why the Wonder Woman movie was so important, because it allows you to see yourself in a completely different way and see that things are possible, and it just changes your perspective. But people need a safe place to explore. We have a number of people within the LARPing community who started playing around with gender representation because they felt safe and comfortable in doing so, and eventually figured out that they were non-binary, or eventually figured out that they were trans. And it was an important part of their transition experience to be able to go somewhere where everybody is playing someone who's not themselves, and be able to put on a persona, which maybe for them was not such a persona, but it was a way for them to explore parts of themselves that they didn't feel comfortable exploring in their regular lives. And so I think LARPing in general and places to play and explore are just so important, especially for people who aren't, cis hetero white men.
Right. You've mentioned several times, you've used the term a safe space several times. So what do people do within the LARP setting to make it a safe space?
There's a bunch of different answers across the community. Mostly, at the end of the day, we want to make sure everybody's having fun. And so if you're role-playing with somebody and they are clearly not having fun, good manners tells you that you need to back off. Because they're in this community too, and they're in this game too. If I'm running a game and I'm running a particularly tense scene for somebody, either I have checked it out with them beforehand to make sure they're okay with it, or once game is over, I'll do Sunday aftercare with them and go up to them and say, hey, how was that for you? Was it scary for you? Was it too tense for you? I also want to reinforce that I am not the horrible villain that they met on Saturday night. I'm me. I'm their friend. I'm someone who's running a game for entertainment. And so the more your players trust your staff and the more your staff trusts your players, the more interesting places you can go in the story, because everybody trusts that at the end of the day, you're here to have a good time. You're here to make an interesting and compelling story. Which doesn't mean that it's going to be the safest story in, all the time.
Right.
It's not going to be the two of you are walking through the forest and there's daisies and lollipops. And I could totally run that game, and comedy games are absolutely a thing. But drama is born out of conflict. And the more everybody trusts each other, the better drama and the better conflict we can do when everybody knows that that's in service to entertainment and a good story.
Wow.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of thought really goes into the planning. And you've talked a bit about being characters, but you've also talked about your enjoyment of running games.
Absolutely. That's, for me, the best part. Because I get to think up worlds, and I get to think up stories, and I get to think of new challenges, and I get to watch my players be amazing. I get to put them in positions of pressure and stress and that are emotionally fraught, and watch them be rock stars and help them be rock stars. And I tease that I can't I can't run plots for somebody unless I love their character. Because I really kind of have to fall in love with their character every time, because I have to want their characters to succeed in order to run good, honest plot for them.
Has that ever gone a way that you didn't expect? Create a situation where you felt that you pushed someone too far or they were too vulnerable?
Sometimes. Earlier in my LARPing career, there were some mistakes. I didn't know somebody as well as I thought they would, or I misplayed a scene, or I thought that they liked a different kind of entertainment than they do. We all make mistakes and misjudgments. Fortunately, the older I get and the more experienced I get, I don't do that as much anymore. And there are ways to kind of check. But like with everything else, if you screw it up, you say you're sorry and you try not to do it again. You try to do better next time. There is a feedback system built into LARPing. We call it the player event letter. And so after every game, each player sends us feedback on what they did, what stories they're interested, if they liked things, if they didn't like things. And so having that feedback is an important part of the process, because, oh, well, that one didn't work this time. All right, well, next time I'm going to do better. Or next time I know that this person doesn't enjoy this kind of thing, or, wow, they loved that. Okay, more of that for them. Great. Because everybody processes entertainment differently. Maybe you really love gooey, emotional, romance plots. Maybe Stephanie really likes psychological horror. Maybe, I really like, being able to process through pain and suffering and the drama of having my character's entire life shattered. Everybody has a different way of approaching entertainment and story and the story arc of their characters. And so you have to try to write to that person's entertainment style.
Well, I think that's one thing that's come through everything you've talked about, is that there is this community that's not just about the game or the day or whatever you're doing in that particular moment, but it's like there's a step back from that. There's a sense of community where you all really care about each other and you're all really committed to this process. So that's...
Ideally, that's exactly the way it works.
Right. And where do you find that you're being able to build that community? I mean, again, kind of going back to if people are interested in this or they've never heard about this before and they're like, wait a minute, this whole thing's been going on and I didn't know about this. This is awesome. I mean, where are you as LARPers putting yourselves out there to draw in new people or to make yourselves known?
Well, every game is different. And so if somebody's looking to join the hobby, the best thing for them to do is either to find a convention that's local to them that has a LARP, or find a game that's local to them. And every game community is going to be a little bit different. And if one game community isn't quite to your style, that's okay. There's another one. Or maybe you're really into 1920s noir games and all you've got in your area is high fantasy. That's okay. Keep looking. You're going to find one that suits your tastes or suits your entertainment style or suits the kind of storytelling that really scratches your itch. You're going to find a website. Odds are you're going to find some sort of social media presence. Facebook and social media in general have been enormously a huge boon to help LARPers communicate and helping people to find each other in the hobby, as well as help people to talk to each other between games and help build that sense of community.
Have you had any sort of special or unique or standout experiences that you'd be interested in sharing? Specific things that, moments, perhaps?
One of the strange things about LARPing is that it's not TV. It's not film. If we take pictures of it, it's a bunch of dorky looking people running around in costumes hitting their friends with plumbing supplies. Like, on a certain level, it's great to talk about the inner workings and psychology and everything else like that, but on a certain level, yeah, we look kind of silly to outsiders. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that either. But it means that the best LARPing moments are internal. Like, what made that moment great was not the action, but the weight of the story and the character behind that action. So for me, my best LARPing moments as a character are when I am completely and fully embodying the character to the extent that I am able, and when the character tells me something new about themselves that I didn't know. So I was in a game, it was a post-apocalyptic horror game, and we were on an adventure where we were going up a skyscraper. And so you would intern in the inside of the skyscraper, not the outside. Oh. Stephanie just gave me that look.
I'm like, you guys built a skyscraper? No. That's amazing.
So we went into this big building, and you kind of fought your way through the level of the building, and then you went into this smaller adjacent room, and the team had set up elevator music and the sound of an elevator. And so the goal was to make it from the elevator back to the elevator and go up to the next floor. And every floor that we experienced was different, and so we would sit in this little room for a minute or two with the elevator music playing and the sound of the gears going, while they reset the larger room to a different configuration.
Oh, wow.
And then we would go and experience the different configuration. I am not claustrophobic, even a little bit. I have no shred of claustrophobia anywhere near me. On that module, I found out my character was.
Oh, wow.
Because there's 20, 30 people packed into a small room, and so there's people in there, then it's warm and they're sweaty, and everybody's kind of up next to you, and everybody's a little bit tense, and I have no idea why my character is claustrophobic. I still have no real explanation for any of it. But my breath started getting short and my pulse started racing, and I was distinctly uncomfortable being in that enclosed space. And I got to test it several times because we left the elevator and went back in the elevator. I was fine in the larger room. We went back in the elevator and I started to panic again. And I have no idea where that came from. But apparently Hannah, my character, was claustrophobic. Go fig. But it was weird and great and makes sense for her in a way that I would never have consciously written. Sometimes the characters just do what the characters do.
That's so interesting.
and writers talk about their characters in this way as well.
Right, where they just, all the characters just sometimes do something, you're like, whoa, that was...
Exactly, and you ask the author, why did the character say that? And you're like, I have no idea, they just said it.
Did it, yeah.
And that's what the character did, and sometimes characters take on a life of their own. And for me, that's the good stuff. Because it means that I built a three-dimensional, complete persona that does their own thing and has their own motivations and makes connections that I wouldn't necessarily make and offers me a different perspective than I have.
Wow.
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. I have to say, I mean, I was looking forward to this because I know like so little about this, but I've always thought it was fascinating. And I can't even begin to thank you enough, Trey, for trekking all the way from your job to come to my little room off the kitchen here and eat food and to tell us about this exciting world that I think is going on and people don't even know this is happening.
You've definitely piqued my interest.
I think you would love it, actually.
Now we have to refer all of our listeners to the internet to find out more.
And also, as Trey said, they're local gaming stores, which are often a great source of information and connections. So yay, independent local gaming stores.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Chasing the Mind. Today's episode featured music from purpleplanet.com. Please visit our website at chasingthemind.com, where you can find out more information about Trey Reilly and where you will find helpful links about LARPing. You can also sign up for the Chasing the Mind newsletter, where you can get information on upcoming guests and special broadcasts.